I can't have children, the cowboy smiled. Good. I've got enough kids for both. The sun was sinking low over Dustwater Creek, a lonely stretch of land where the wind always carried the scent of dry sage and old sorrow. The horizon burned with the colors of copper and fire, and through that fading light came a creaking wagon, carrying one woman and all her earthly belongings. Clara Jameson sat straight-backed on the driver's bench, reins loose in her gloved hands. Her face was pale, gentle, and tired. You could tell at a glance that she'd seen more loss than her years should have allowed. A widow's black ribbon still hung from her bonnet, though it had long since faded to gray from the sun. She wasn't running from anything, not exactly. But sometimes, leaving was the only way to keep breathing. The paper folded in her lap bore smudged ink from the long journey. It was a letter, an offer, from Elias McGraw, a widowed rancher in Dustwater County. He needed a live-in schoolteacher for his 3 children. And Clara needed a reason to get up in the morning. She traced the ink with her fingertips, whispering the words aloud like a prayer. Room and board provided. Must have a kind hand with children. That was all it took for her to pack her few things. Her late husband's Bible, a set of teaching books, and one small keepsake she never spoke of, a knitted baby's bonnet she kept wrapped in linen. She never had the heart to throw it away, though she had no child to wear it. Arrival at the McGraw Ranch. By the time she reached the McGraw property, twilight had turned the land gold and violet. The ranch stretched wide across the valley, fences mended with care, smoke rising from the chimney, and the faint sound of laughter drifting from the barn. It didn't feel like the kind of place where pain lived. But Clara knew, pain hides in the places that look the most peaceful. A tall figure came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Elias McGraw was broad and weather-worn, the kind of man whose strength didn't shout, it simply existed. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, arms streaked with dust and sun. But it was his eyes, steady and kind beneath the brim of his hat, that made her forget how to breathe for a heartbeat. He stopped short when he saw her. "You must be the teacher," he said, voice low and rough-edged like gravel. Clara nodded, stepping down carefully. "Yes, sir." "Clara Jameson." He tipped his hat. "Elias McGraw. Welcome to the ranch." Then, glancing toward the doorway, he added with a sigh, "And these little rascals you'll be teaching." 3 children peeked out, barefoot and curious, Anna 10, Luke 8 and Tommy barely 5. Their eyes were bright and wild, full of the mischief that only comes from missing a mother's steady hand. Clara smiled softly. "Hello there." Anna crossed her arms, suspicious. "You're not gonna run off like the last one, are you?" Elias groaned. "Anna?" But Clara just knelt down, meeting the girl's gaze. "No, sweetheart. I'm not planning on running from anything." She smiled, the kind that comes from deep understanding, not easy comfort. "I've done enough of that already." The girl blinked, uncertain, then whispered, "You talk soft. I like that." And for the first time, Elias saw something change in his daughter's expression, a small, hopeful flicker. Inside the ranch house. The house smelled of firewood and bread, simple good things. Elias showed her around with quiet pride. "The roof leaks some when it rains," he admitted, "and the stove's temperamental. But we manage." Clara ran a hand along the worn table, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's warm? That's what matters." She unpacked her books in the small spare room he offered her, the walls plain but the window overlooking the corral. As she placed her candle by the bed, she took out the baby bonnet and held it for a moment, then tucked it gently into the drawer. Outside, she heard the children arguing about bedtime. Elias's patient voice followed, low and fatherly. And for the first time in years, Clara felt something stir, the sound of a home, not just a house. The first supper. At supper they sat together, awkward at first, all elbows and silence. Clara folded her hands. "Would you mind if I say grace?" Elias nodded. The children watched her curiously as she prayed, soft and simple words about gratitude, the kind that settle the heart. Halfway through the meal, Tommy spilled his cup and milk splashed everywhere. He froze, waiting for the scolding that never came. Clara just smiled, grabbed a cloth and said gently, "Accidents are how we learn, young man." Tommy's small face lit up. Elias watched, quiet, his chest tightening at the sight. His late wife Mary used to speak that way, calm, patient, loving. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the only adult in the room. The night talk. After the dishes were done and the children asleep, Clara stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low, silvering the fields. The night air was cool and honest, the kind that carried memories you wished you could forget. Elias came out with 2 mugs of coffee, offering one to her. "Long trip, I reckon," he said quietly. 3 days, she replied. But it feels longer when you don't know what's waiting at the end of it. He nodded slowly, studying her profile. You runnin' from something? She smiled faintly. Maybe just the sound of my own thoughts. He chuckled softly. Well, you'll have plenty of noise here. Between the kids, the cows, and the wind, this place doesn't leave much room for thinking. She looked at him then, really looked, and said, maybe that's exactly what I need. He tipped his hat. Then maybe we both got lucky today, Miss Jameson. They sat there a long while in companionable silence, watching the stars. Two souls marked by loss, unknowingly standing at the edge of something that might just heal them both. And as the crickets sang and the children's laughter echoed faintly through the open window, Clara thought, maybe, just maybe, this place could be a new beginning. Morning came early at the McGraw Ranch, carried on the scent of coffee and the sound of hooves. The rooster hadn't even finished crowing when Clara Jameson stirred in her bed, the first slivers of sunlight slipping across the quilt. She rose, dressed in her plain cotton dress, and tied her hair back neatly. In her previous life, mornings had been for waiting for letters, for the doctor's words to change, for her husband's cough to quiet. But here, there was no waiting. Only doing. Only life. When she stepped into the kitchen, she found Elias McGraw already there, pouring coffee with one hand and flipping biscuits from a pan with the other. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the lean muscle of a man who'd been up since before dawn. Mornin', Miss Jameson, he said, with a voice like low thunder softened by warmth. Morning, Mr. McGraw, she replied, smiling faintly. You're up early. He grinned. Ranch doesn't run itself. Coffee's strong enough to wake a ghost if you need it. She accepted the cup, the warmth seeping into her fingers. I might need 2 cups then if your children are anything like their father. He chuckled, a deep, genuine sound she hadn't realized she missed until now. The classroom under the roof. After breakfast, Clara began what she came to do, teaching. There was no schoolhouse, just a long oak table under the eaves of the ranch house, sunlight spilling through the window as dust motes danced in the air. All right, she said softly, today we'll start with reading. Who can tell me what this word is? Little Tommy, perched on his chair with legs swinging, squinted at the paper. A cat? That's right, she said, smiling, but the word's cow. It's close enough for a ranch boy. He giggled, and the sound made something in her chest flutter. Anna, the oldest, was quick and bright but guarded. She pretended not to care about lessons, though her pencil moved across the page faster than anyone's. Luke, meanwhile, had the energy of a tumbleweed in a windstorm, curious one minute, gone the next. At first it was chaos. Spilled ink. Arguments. Laughter too loud. But within days, Clara's gentle rhythm began to tame the storm. She didn't scold, she guided. When Luke couldn't sit still, she turned his restlessness into helping with chores. When Anna hid her shyness behind a sharp tongue, Clara praised her cleverness until it softened into kindness. Elias often stood at the door watching quietly, a hint of awe in his eyes. His children had never sat that still, never looked so eager to learn. And for the first time in years he thought, maybe we ain't broken after all. Evenings by the fire. By sundown, Clara was usually exhausted, her skirts dusty, her hair loose from its pins, but her eyes bright with the kind of peace that comes from purpose. One evening, as she sewed a tear in Luke's shirt by lamplight, Elias walked in from the barn, carrying a stack of firewood. You work more than most men I know, he said, setting the logs down. She smiled without looking up. I work best when I have someone to work for. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her hands move with quiet grace. You miss your home? He asked gently. She hesitated, then said, I miss what it used to be. He nodded slowly. I know that feeling. The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. Neither spoke for a long time. But it wasn't uncomfortable, it was the kind of silence that felt like understanding. Whispers of the past. Later that night, Clara stood outside, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. The land stretched wide beneath a silver moon. In the stillness, she could almost hear her late husband's voice, warm, steady, fading with the years. You would have liked this place, Henry, she whispered. It's loud and wild, and alive. Behind her, Elias's voice broke the quiet. Everything all right, Miss Jameson? She turned, startled. I didn't hear you come out. He stepped closer, his boots crunching softly in the dirt. Didn't mean to intrude. You looked a mile away. Just remembering. He nodded. Some things are worth remembering. Others, best left where they are. She smiled faintly. I'm still figuring out which is which. His gaze lingered, gentle but searching. You don't have to figure it out alone, you know? Her heart skipped and she looked away, unsure what to say. Good night, Mr. McGraw, she whispered. Good night, Miss Jameson, he replied, his voice softer than the breeze. The first laugh. The next morning brought laughter. Bright, loud, contagious. Clara was in the yard teaching Tommy how to count using small rocks. He kept mixing them up, turning 3 into 5, 5 into 7, until she burst into laughter so genuine it startled even herself. Elias, coming out from the barn, froze. He hadn't heard that sound, that kind of laughter, in years. It wrapped around him, warm and unexpected. He leaned against the post, smiling faintly as he watched her and his boy rolling rocks and laughter into the same pile. When Clara looked up, catching his gaze, a quiet warmth passed between them. Neither spoke, but both knew something had changed. A quiet promise. That night, as the family gathered for supper, Anna reached for Clara's hand when saying grace. It was a small gesture, shy, uncertain, but it made Clara's eyes sting. Elias saw it too. His gaze softened as he bowed his head, his voice deep and reverent when he said, Amen. When the children were asleep, he found Clara tidying the kitchen. You're doing more good here than you know, he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. I'm only teaching them. He shook his head slowly. You're teaching me too. For a moment they stood there, close, the air between them charged with something neither dared name. Then, before the silence could break, she whispered, Good night, Mr. McGraw. He nodded. Good night, Miss Jameson. As she turned away, Elias's voice followed, low and warm. Glad you came when you did. This house needed your kind of quiet. And though she said nothing, the words followed her to bed, like a promise whispered against the dark. It was a Sunday morning when the wind began to change. At first, it came gentle through the valley, a soft hum over the grass, cool against the rising sun. But by noon, the sky had turned heavy and gray, pressing low on the land like a warning. Clara Jameson stood at the porch, apron fluttering in the wind, watching the horizon darken. Dustwater Creek had its moods, and this one felt different, wild, unpredictable. Behind her, Elias McGraw stepped out of the barn, scanning the sky with narrowed eyes. She's coming fast, he muttered. Big one too. Should we bring the children in? Clara asked. He nodded sharply. Get 'em inside. I'll tie down what I can before she hits. The storm breaks. By the time Clara got the children settled inside, the storm had arrived in full fury. Rain pounded the windows like fists. The wind howled through the eaves and lightning split the sky wide open. Elias was still outside, his figure barely visible through the sheets of rain as he wrestled with a section of broken fence that the wind was trying to tear loose. Clara's heart lurched. She could have stayed inside, could have prayed he'd be safe. But something stronger than fear took over. She threw on her shawl, shoved the door open and stepped into the chaos. The wind nearly tore the breath from her lungs. Mud clung to her skirts as she stumbled toward him, shouting over the storm, Elias. He looked up, startled. What in heaven's name are you doing out here? I couldn't just watch, she cried, grabbing the loose end of a fence rail as it threatened to blow away. Together they fought the wind, side by side, hands slick with rain, bodies pressed against the fence to hold it steady. Lightning flashed, turning the world white for an instant. Elias's arm brushed hers as they worked, their breaths coming fast, mingling with the roar of the storm. It was wild and terrifying, and strangely alive. After the storm, when the thunder finally rolled away and the rain eased into silence, the ranch lay battered but standing. The fence was half mended, the cattle scattered but safe in the pasture. Elias turned to her, rain dripping from his hat, his face streaked with mud. You're a stubborn woman, Miss Jameson, he said, half a smile tugging at his mouth. She laughed breathlessly, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. I've been called worse. His eyes softened, scanning her face. You all right? She nodded, but her voice trembled slightly. Just cold? Without thinking, he reached out, his calloused hands settling the shawl back over her shoulders. But when his fingers brushed her neck, something stilled between them. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The air, still humming with the echo of thunder, seemed to thicken. Thank you, she whispered. Elias's voice dropped low. You didn't have to come out there. But I'm mighty glad you did. Their eyes met, a heartbeat too long, before she stepped back, flustered. I should check on the children, she murmured. He nodded slowly. Yeah, go on. But long after she disappeared into the house, Elias stayed there, hat in hand, the storm's chill still clinging to him. Not from the rain, but from what had just passed between them. A quiet evening. The children were safe, frightened but unharmed. The fire crackled in the hearth as Clara tended to them, drying their hair with soft, steady hands. When the youngest, Tommy, crawled into her lap and fell asleep against her, she froze for a moment, then slowly, carefully wrapped her arms around him. It felt foreign and right all at once. A child's weight. A heartbeat pressed against her own. When she looked up, Elias stood in the doorway watching quietly. The glow of the fire lit his face, softening the hard lines. "Reckon he trusts you already?" he said gently. She smiled faintly. Children see things grown folks forget how to. Like what? Like who's safe. Their eyes met again, steady, unguarded. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew something had shifted that day. Something deeper than gratitude. Something stronger than circumstance. The porch at midnight. The storm had long passed when Clara stepped outside again that night. The air smelled clean, sharp with rain and pine. The land glistened beneath the moonlight, renewed and raw. She heard the creak of the porch boards behind her. Elias joined her, leaning against the post, arms folded. "Fence'll need fixin' come mornin'," he said quietly. Clara smiled. "So will the laundry." He chuckled, a soft, low sound. Then after a pause he added, "You've got grit, Miss Jameson. I've seen cowhands half your size give up faster." She looked at him, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Maybe I had to be strong. Life didn't give me much choice." Elias turned his head slightly, studying her face. "You talk like a woman who's lost something." Clara's throat tightened. She hesitated, then said softly, "I suppose I have." He didn't press. Didn't pry. Just nodded, his voice gentle as the night wind. "Whatever it was, you're doing right by being here?" They stood there, side by side, as the last of the storm clouds drifted away, two hearts bruised by the past, finding a strange comfort in each other's silence. And as she looked out over the silvered fields, Clara realized something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live again. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, the kind of light that makes everything seem new. The land glittered under the sun, washed clean by the night's rain. Birds sang from the fence posts, and the children's laughter drifted from the yard as they chased each other through puddles. Inside the ranch house, Clara Jameson stood by the window, hands folded, watching them. She should have felt peace. The ranch had weathered the storm well and everyone was safe. But instead, a strange heaviness pressed against her chest. She had found something here, something steady, almost sacred, and that frightened her. Because the more she cared, the harder the truth would be when it finally came out. She had seen it happen before, the way faces changed when people learned she could never bear children. The sympathy, the distance, the quiet disappointment that followed. And now, there were eyes she couldn't bear to see change, the kind, steady ones that belonged to Elias McGraw. A gentle day's work. Elias was out near the barn, mending the fence that the storm had nearly torn down. His youngest, Tommy, carried nails in a tin, tripping over his own boots, while Clara kept watch from the porch. Elias's voice carried on the wind, low, patient, full of affection. "Easy there, cowboy. Don't go running with nails again unless you plan to poke the sky." Tommy giggled. "Yes, Pa." Clara smiled despite herself. Elias had that rare kind of kindness that didn't need to be loud. It was in the way he looked at his children, the way he listened when they spoke, the way he said her name, like it meant something. Later that afternoon, when the children napped and the chores were done, she found him by the corral, leaning against the rail, the sun casting his shadow long across the dust. "You've been quiet today," he said, not looking at her but sensing her thoughts. She hesitated, then answered softly, "Just thinking. About how quickly this place came to feel like home." He glanced her way, a small, knowing smile tugging at his mouth. "Reckon that's because you fit right in." Her heart twisted. He didn't know the whole of her, not yet. And once he did, would he still think she belonged here? The question that broke the silence. That evening, after supper, as the children played by the fire, little Tommy turned toward Clara with the pure, curious bluntness only a child could carry. "Miss C," he said, "why don't you got babies of your own?" The question struck like a spark in the quiet room. Elias's hand froze halfway to his coffee. Anna frowned. "Tommy?" But Clara only smiled, a small, trembling smile, and knelt down beside him. Her voice was soft but steady. "Because, sweetheart, some women's hearts are made to love, not to bear. And that's enough." Tommy blinked, then nodded solemnly, accepting the answer without judgment, as only children can. But when Clara looked up, Elias's gaze was waiting for hers, heavy with questions. He said nothing. Not yet. but the look in his eyes told her he would. The truth comes out. After the children had gone to bed, Clara went to the porch to breathe. The night was still, the stars sharp and bright. She could hear the crickets singing, the horses shifting in the barn, and behind her, the creak of boots on the old wood. Elias stepped out holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She took the cup, though her hands trembled. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." He leaned on the post beside her. "You don't owe me nothing you don't want to share." But she shook her head. "No, you deserve the truth." Her voice wavered as she went on. "My husband and I, we tried for years to have children. Doctor said it wasn't meant to be. There was an illness after that. Took him from me before we could make peace with it. Since then people look at me different, like I'm missing something. Like I'm less of a woman." She stared down into her coffee, ashamed of the words even as they left her lips. "I thought if I came here I could start again, but I never meant to bring that kind of sorrow into your home." For a long moment, Elias didn't speak. The night hummed with quiet. Then he set his cup down, stepped closer and said softly, "Clara, look at me." When she did, his eyes held nothing but warmth. "Good," he said, his voice steady as the earth itself. "I've got enough kids for both of us." Her breath caught. He smiled faintly, not the kind that mocked or dismissed, but the kind that soothed like balm on a wound. "You hear me? You ain't broken. You're just built for a different kind of love. My children, they already see it. Took 'em all of 2 weeks to decide you belong here." Her eyes shimmered. "And what about you?" she whispered. He chuckled low in his throat. "Darlin', I made up my mind the day you held a storm at bay beside me." Clara blinked hard, fighting tears. "You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I do," he said gently. "You don't need to give me more children, Clara. You already gave mine their mother back." The first touch of something more. The world felt still around them, the crickets, the soft creak of the porch boards, the hush of nightfall. Elias reached up, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. His hand lingered a heartbeat longer than it should have. "You belong here," he said quietly. "Don't let the past tell you otherwise." Clara didn't pull away. For the first time in years she let herself breathe, really breathe, in the space of someone's kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias smiled. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. Just truth." She turned toward the fields, blinking away the tears that refused to fall. "It's been a long time since anyone saw me as anything more than what I couldn't give." Elias's voice came soft but certain behind her. "Then maybe it's time someone did." The moonlight caught her face, the faintest smile trembling at her lips. And as the night stretched quiet and silver around them, something unspoken passed between them, not a promise yet, but something stronger. A beginning. The next morning dawned soft and gold, as though the storm had washed the whole world clean. Mist rolled over the fields and the smell of wet earth hung in the air. Clara stood by the porch rail, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, watching Elias saddle his horse. He moved slow, deliberate, every motion purposeful. The kind of man who didn't waste words, but when he spoke you listened. She'd spent most of the night awake, replaying his words over and over again. "Good. I've got enough kids for both." No man had ever answered her pain with gentleness before. No man had ever made her feel whole even when she confessed her brokenness. A quiet morning ride. Elias caught her watching him. "You ever ride?" he asked, brushing a bit of mud from his boot. "Once or twice," she said, smiling faintly. "Back when I thought I'd live an ordinary life." He raised a brow. "This ain't ordinary?" She laughed softly. "Not quite." He gestured toward the horse. "Come on then. Let's make it a little less ordinary." Clara hesitated. "Elias, I can't leave the children." "They're helpin' Molly with breakfast," he interrupted, a teasing glint in his eyes. "You deserve 5 minutes of peace, don't you?" So she did something she hadn't done in years, she let herself say yes. Elias helped her mount up, his hand firm at her waist. The warmth of his touch lingered longer than it should have. They rode along the edge of the property, the morning air crisp and full of birdsong. The land stretched out in every direction, endless, alive and full of promise. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she belonged somewhere. The moment between them. They stopped by the creek, where the water ran clear over smooth stones. Elias dismounted first, tying his horse to a low branch, then reached up to help her down. But when their hands met, neither moved. "Clara," he began, his voice rough, almost uncertain. "You think what you told me changes how I see you. It don't." Her heart fluttered painfully. "You don't understand. Most men want a legacy. They want someone to carry their name. I can't give you that. Elias's thumb brushed against her wrist, slow, deliberate. Maybe you don't see it yet, but you've already given me something I didn't think I'd have again. She frowned slightly. What's that? He met her eyes, steady and sure. Peace. The house feels alive since you came. My kids laugh again. I sleep easier. You gave all that without trying. Don't tell me you've got nothing to give. Clara blinked back tears, shaking her head. You shouldn't say things like that. It's not fair. He stepped closer, his voice low and honest. I don't know much about fair. I just know what's true. And for a moment the air between them shifted, quiet, charged, full of something unspoken. If he'd reached for her then, she wasn't sure she would have stopped him. A past that won't let go. But before she could reply, a voice broke the spell. Pa. Little Tommy came running down the hill, waving his arms. The mare's gone into labor. Elias's head snapped toward the barn. Already? That's early. He swung onto his horse in one motion and looked back at her. Come on, Miss Jameson. Time to see how a real cowboy morning goes. Clara followed on foot, skirts flying, heart pounding from more than just the rush. The birth in the barn. Inside the air was thick with the smell of hay and sweat. The mare lay trembling, eyes wide with fear. Elias knelt beside her, his voice low and steady, murmuring reassurance. Clara stood just behind, unsure what to do but unwilling to leave. Hand me that blanket, he said, pointing. She did, and before long she found herself kneeling beside him, holding the foal's slick body as it entered the world. Together they brought life into the quiet barn. When the foal finally let out its first trembling breath, Clara felt her own catch in her throat. Elias looked up at her, mud on his hands, joy in his eyes. See? World still got room for new beginnings. She smiled through the tears she didn't bother to hide. You make it sound easy. It ain't, he said softly. But it's worth it. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, his thumb lingering a heartbeat too long. I meant what I said, Clara. You don't need to give me children. You already gave me a family again. Her breath trembled. And what about you? What do you need? Elias's voice dropped low. Just someone who'll stay. For a long moment neither moved, the new foal nuzzling its mother, the morning sun spilling through the barn doors. Then he stood, offering her his hand. Come on. Let's get cleaned up before the kids see we've been wrestling mud. She laughed, light and free, and took his hand. And though she didn't say it out loud, something inside her whispered the truth. She was already his in all the ways that mattered. The week after the foal's birth felt like a dream. The ranch, once filled with silence and grief, now pulsed with laughter. Clara had found her rhythm, baking bread in the mornings, teaching the little ones letters by the fire in the evenings. Elias watched her move through the house like she'd always belonged there. The children followed her like shadows. And for the first time in years the McGraw home felt like home again. But peace never lasted long in Dustwater Ridge. The ride to town. It was Saturday when Elias hitched the wagon to take supplies into town. Clara came along, a basket of baked goods in her lap. Gifts for the neighbors, she said. They rode in silence at first, the road winding through golden grass and sunlight. Then Elias glanced at her. You sure you want to come? Clara smiled faintly. Why wouldn't I? He hesitated. Dustwater folks, they got sharp tongues sometimes. Ain't kind to strangers. I've faced worse than gossip, she said softly. He nodded, but his jaw stayed tight all the same. The general store. The bell above the door jingled when they stepped inside. The air smelled of flour, soap, and old pine boards. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Holt, a broad woman with silver hair and a sharper stare. Well, if it ain't Elias McGraw, she said. Been a spell since you brought a lady into town. Elias tipped his hat. Just picking up feed, Mrs. Holt. Mrs. Holt's gaze shifted to Clara, slow, appraising. And who's this? Clara smiled politely. Clara Jameson, ma'am. I'm helpin' out at the ranch. Mrs. Holt's lips twitched. Helpin', is it? The word dripped with meaning. The store grew quieter. A couple of men at the back paused their talk to glance over. Elias's shoulders stiffened. That's right, he said evenly. She's been a blessin' to my family. Clara lowered her eyes, clutching the basket tighter. Mrs. Holt gave a tight smile. Well, isn't that something? Whispers. By the time they loaded the wagon again, Clara's cheeks burned. She could feel the stares from every porch they passed. Elias, she said finally, voice trembling, they think I'm... He cut her off gently. Let 'em think what they want. They ain't worth the breath it takes to explain. but his hand tightened on the reins, his jaw hard as stone. As they left town, Clara stared out at the horizon, the mountains rising blue in the distance. "This is why I left before," she whispered. "Everywhere I go it starts the same. People look, they whisper, then they find out." "Find out what?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then turned to him. "That I was married once. That he left me when he found out I couldn't bear children. He told folks I was cursed. And I let him believe it." Elias said nothing for a long time. The horse's hooves clopped softly against the dirt. Then finally, "You didn't deserve that." Clara's voice broke. "Maybe I did. I couldn't give him what he wanted." Elias looked at her, eyes blazing with something fierce and protective. "You gave him the chance to love you. If he walked away from that, he's the cursed one, not you." Tears welled in her eyes. "You can't know that." He reached over, laying a hand over hers. "I do." And that simple touch, steady, rough, and real, silenced every lie she'd ever believed about herself. The night the past returned. That night, just as the sun dropped behind the ridge, a horse approached the ranch. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, his eyes narrowing as the rider came into view. The man dismounted, dust-covered and pale. "Elias McGraw," he called. "That's me." "Who's a skin?" "Name's Turner. Came from Carson Creek. I'm looking for a woman, Clara Jameson." Elias's voice turned low. "What business you got with her?" The man shifted uneasily. "She's got a dad. A husband too. He's been looking for her." Elias's heart sank, and the fire in his eyes changed. "Her husband." Turner nodded. "Said she ran off. He wants her brought back." Behind him the door creaked open. Clara stood there, pale as moonlight. Her eyes met Elias's, full of terror and shame. "It's true," she whispered. "He's not lying." Elias turned slowly toward her, his hand still gripping the rifle. "You mean, he's still alive?" She nodded, trembling. "And he'll never stop looking." The night went silent except for the soft whinny of a horse in the distance. Elias took one long step toward her, his voice quiet but certain. "Then he'll have to go through me first." The line in the dirt. Clara's breath hitched. "Elias, you can't." He cut her off gently. "You didn't run from him to end up scared again. Not here. Not while I'm standing. She stared at him, tears glistening. "Why are you doing this?" He smiled faintly, that quiet, stubborn cowboy smile that never wavered. "Because I told you once, you don't need to give me children. You already gave me something worth protecting." And as the stars rose over Dustwater Ridge, Clara realized the truth she'd been running from all her life. Love didn't have to come from blood. Sometimes it came from courage, from the man who refused to let her face her past alone. The morning broke cold and gray. A fog rolled in over the ridge, settling low across the fields like smoke. Clara stood at the window of the ranch house, her hands trembling as she watched the figure ride slowly up the path, the man she'd once called husband. He was thinner now, harder. The years had carved bitterness into his face. Elias stood beside her, silent. His jaw was set, his hat low. He'd already sent the children to the barn, out of sight. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't get involved in this." He didn't look at her when he said, "Too late for that, darling." The confrontation. The man dismounted in the yard, dust kicking up beneath his boots. He looked around with disdain before calling out, "Clara, I know you're here." Elias stepped forward, steady and unshaken. "You got business, you take it up with me." The man sneered. "Who are you?" "Elias McGraw, owner of this ranch." "Then you're harboring my wife." Elias's voice turned to steel. "She ain't your wife. You gave that up when you left her to fend for herself." The man's hand twitched near his belt, not quite drawing but close enough. "Careful, cowboy. You don't know what kind of woman you're protecting." "I know enough," Elias said calmly. "I know she's kind. I know she's strong. And I know she's got no reason to fear you anymore." The wind cut through the silence that followed. Clara stepped out then, her shawl pulled tight but her chin high. "I won't go back," she said quietly. "You had your chance to be a husband and you walked away." Her old husband's eyes narrowed. "You're still mine, Clara." "No," she said firmly. "I was yours when I was frightened and small. I'm not that woman anymore." Elias took one step closer, voice low but deadly. "You heard her. Get off my land." The man's eyes flicked between them, then to the rifle resting against the porch post. He spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this, McGraw." Elias didn't move. "Not likely." The man swung back onto his horse and rode off, the echo of hooves fading down the trail, swallowed by the wind. Clara stood there, frozen, tears trembling in her eyes. The aftermath. When the dust finally settled, Elias turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded shakily, then shook her head all at once. "I thought I'd have to run again. I always run." He reached out, his hand resting gently against her cheek. "Not anymore." Her breath caught. "You don't understand. That man." "I understand just fine," he interrupted softly. "You've been fighting alone a long time. You don't have to anymore." For the first time she didn't argue. She just leaned into his touch, her tears hot against his palm. The cowboy's confession. Later that evening, as the sun bled red over Dustwater Ridge, Elias found her sitting on the porch steps. The children were chasing fireflies out in the field, laughter echoing through the cooling air. He sat down beside her. "Quiet night," he said. "Feels like peace," she replied softly. He nodded, staring out at the horizon. "Ain't had much of that in a long time." They sat there a while in silence, until he finally spoke again. "Clara, when my wife passed, I thought that was the end of everything good in me. Then you came along and reminded me I could still feel something. I could still hope." She turned to look at him, eyes wide, glistening. "I don't care what the world says you can't give," he continued. "You've already given me more than I ever thought I'd get again. You gave me a home that laughs. You gave my kids their mama back, even if you don't share their blood." Clara's voice trembled. "Elias." He smiled faintly, that slow, rugged grin that always melted her fear. "So if you're still worried about not having children?" He took her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. "Good. 'Cause I got enough kids for both of us." She laughed through her tears, the sound soft and broken and beautiful. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Darlin', I've never been more sure of anything. The new beginning." The next morning the ranch woke to sunlight, warm and golden, spilling across the fields. Clara stood on the porch in a faded blue dress, watching Elias teach Tommy how to throw a rope. Little Mary clung to her skirts, giggling as the chickens scattered. When Elias caught her watching, he tipped his hat and grinned. "You comin' down here, Mrs. McGraw, or you just gonna stare all day?" She blinked, smiling shyly. "Mrs. McGraw?" He nodded, still grinning. "Got a nice ring to it, don't it?" Her heart swelled as she stepped off the porch and into the sunlight, into the life she'd never dared dream of. The life that had waited for her all along, right there on the edge of Dustwater Ridge. 1 year later. The ranch was busier than ever, the foal now a yearling, the garden full, the laughter of children echoing through every open window. Clara knelt in the dirt, showing Mary how to plant beans in neat rows. When she looked up, Elias was watching her from the fence line, arms folded, a proud smile on his face. She smiled back, the kind of smile that said home. He walked over, crouched beside her, and said quietly, "Guess we did all right, huh?" She leaned into him, eyes soft. "Better than all right." He kissed the top of her head. "Told you, Clara, I've got enough love, enough life, and enough kids for both of us." And as the sun set over Dustwater Ridge, their laughter rose with it. Proof that even the broken can find their way home again.